And our final speaker before lunch, and he promises not to hold us up too long, probably doesn't need too much of an introduction, and it's Eric from Kantar.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for inviting me. It's a bit of a strange room because everyone's standing at the back and all of the tables up here are empty. And for those of you that ever watch from the States and ever see a series called Between Two Ferns, this is what it feels like standing here with this big plant here. I was coming over on the plane this morning and I was kind of just thinking about how to start this talk. And I was reading an article that it was 30 years today that the BBC stopped using magnets on its weather forecast. So if you remember 30 years back, some of you weren't here 30 years ago, but those of you that do remember the weather forecast 30 years ago, someone would stand with a map of whatever country, in this case the UK, and he, because it tended to be a he would have all kinds of magnets. One would be a cloud, one would be a rain magnet, one would be a hurricane magnet, and he'd put them on different parts of the map. And that was the weather forecast, and that's how he would convey the weather forecast. And it just struck me that in 30 years, a lot about weather forecasting hasn't changed. And basically, people still want to know what it's going to be like tomorrow morning, this afternoon. What's the weather going to be like? At another level, a huge amount has changed in terms of the way that the weather forecast is delivered to people, the way it's shown, the accuracy of the weather forecast, the real-time nature or the long-term nature of it, the way that the weather forecast is used for different things that it wasn't used for 30 years ago. And that's a bit how I feel about our industry, that a huge amount is changing, that a lot is staying the same in terms of needs. We don't have 30 years, though. We have, I think, a very short period of time to really change the way that we do things, how we do things, what we do, for us to thrive as an industry. And so what I'll talk about over the next 15 minutes or so is really what I think needs to change and what we need to do about it. And obviously there are people in this room from different types of companies, and not all of the needs here are the same. The needs of a startup company that has just started, is in one market, is breaking through, is very different from the need of a Kantar, which is established in lots of places and has got a different set of issues. So I'm not trying to say that we all share exactly the same issues, but certainly in terms of the background against which we're operating, I think we do share many of the same things. And in thinking about the next 5 years and what we need to do, I think it's also really important not to think about averages, not to generalize too much, not to think about the average client or just talk about clients or people or needs, because the averages hide a huge amount. I was traveling last week. I had Monday in Mumbai and I had Tuesday in New York. The temperature in Mumbai was 32 degrees. The temperature in New York was -20. For those of you that are better at maths than me, I think that means it was an average of about 6 degrees. Now, if you said, plan your trip for an average of 6 degrees, it wouldn't have helped me very much. I wouldn't have had the right set of clothes for Mumbai, and I wouldn't have had the right set of clothes for New York. As it so happens, I didn't have the right set of clothes anyway for either of them, but the average hides too much there. So it's really important when we're thinking about what's happening to us and what's happening to our clients and the environment, not to just think about the average, not to think about the generalizations, but to really think about some of the extremes, because it's some of the extremes and it's some of the ends of the spectrum that are really driving what it is that we need to do differently. So that's the kind of basic hypothesis, and the thing that I think we're facing more than anyone else as an industry is, and our biggest issue, is the need to change really fast. It used to be that we could talk about trade-offs, that we could say, well, we can do this or that, and we have to trade things off. And what I'd like to suggest to you is that that era of trade-offs is over. That the biggest issue that we have is actually how to do multiple things at the same time and to do them with speed. And that becomes a big cultural issue. It's not a research issue around technique, it's a cultural issue about how to do multiple things at speed and scale them. So let me just give you a few examples of what I mean by not having the trade-offs available to us. And it's what I've called the death of either or. So it's not either this or that, it's how do we do both. So what does either or look like from a client point of view? Well, in many ways, client needs are the same. I mean, if we were in Amsterdam 10 years ago or 5 years ago, what clients need at some level is very much the same. They want really talented people on their business. They want people who are proactive. They want people who understand their business. They want people who can do great work and deliver it with impact. At some level, none of that has changed. They want to understand people as people, consumers as consumers, and what does it mean for them. But at the same time, a lot has changed. If you think about a number of clients, and if I think about a big client like Procter & Gamble, I know there are some P&G people in the room. Mark Pritchard, who's the CMO of Procter & Gamble globally, talks about research in terms of it being much more of a newsroom. So not something that you look back and you understand what happened months ago, but much more of a newsroom in real time. What's happening today, yesterday, what do we need to do differently as P&G to respond to that? And that means delivering much more of a kind of dashboard point of view, much more something that looks like this, that brings together lots of information in real time than looking back and explaining what happened months ago. If you think about, again, some of the things that you'll hear today and tomorrow, I think you're going to hear from the folk at Zappi store tomorrow. We've made an investment in Zappi store. A number of our businesses like TNS and Millward Brown and Added Value and others have got some products on Zappi store. Zappi deals and caters for a real need that clients have. Not just a need for small clients who don't have money, but big clients with multi-million-dollar budgets, for whom there is a particular need to use self-service, very fast turnaround research for certain types of things that they want to do. Now, it's interesting that at the same time that clients are spending money on Zappi, they are also spending money on consulting. So you've got growth coming at both ends of that spectrum. They want deep, deep consulting with really deep understanding of what's going on, and at the same time want to be able to do things faster, much quicker turnaround. So it's not a you have to be at one end or the other. For a company like us, we have to be at both ends of that spectrum. Some of you can choose to be at one end or another, and niche companies and startups should choose where you want to play, but you really need to understand what the spectrum is and play where you need to. So it's not an either or. It's not the whole world is moving towards self-serve or the whole world is moving towards consulting. It's both, and we need to be able to do both. If you think about it from a culture point of view, our biggest issue is what do we evolve and what do we revolutionize? So everything needs to change, but some things need to change incrementally. They need to get better. And some things need to really be changed out of all recognition. And understanding what those things are, it's not a matter of saying either or again, it's a matter of saying, right, we need to do both of those, but around what should we do both of those? And there are some areas where we do need to revolutionize. If I look at a lot of questionnaire design in the industry, the vast majority of questionnaire design is still not designed for mobile. People use mobile panels and they use mobile respondents, but most of the questionnaire design is questionnaire design that was done for an online environment that is simply being pushed into a mobile environment. And yet we know from our own panels that in markets like the US, almost half of all of the panelists that we're recruiting now, we're recruiting through mobile means. So we have panelists who want to engage with us around mobile, but we're not delivering to them mobile questionnaires from the point of view of the thinking behind the questionnaires as mobile should be delivered. And there is revolution, because it's not going to take very long for all of the people that we're surveying to move on to mobile, whichever market we're in. And of course, there are still parts of what we do where we use face-to-face. A lot of the political and social work that TNS does still has to be face-to-face. In markets around the world, face-to-face is sometimes still cheaper than online. But mobile delivers an experience and an ability to do things that we can't do through other means. So there are parts of what we do that do really need to be revolutionized, and understanding which of them are which is important. And I think the other thing from an industry point of view is really thinking about research differently. And what do I mean by that? Most of what we did as an industry falls in the left-hand side, what I've called here learn applications. So most of what we talk about is trying to help our clients understand consumers better or understand people better. So whether it's understanding brand health, whether it's predicting how people will behave, whether it's segmenting a market, these are all things that are really there to design to help clients understand things better. But we've got a whole load of areas now where we need to think of our industry as not being in the understanding part, but being in the action part. The biggest new buzzword, the biggest reality that's changing in the media buying and planning world is what's called programmatic buying, which really, is just it's a word designed to confuse people because no one really understands what it means, but all it really means is planning media and buying media according to who the audience is. So knowing that I'm targeting a certain type of person. Now, there are a huge number of data sources that we have and a huge number of applications that we have that are ideally suited to programmatic media planning and buying. They're not about understanding anything better. They're not about a deep dive into what people feel or how they engage with a brand. They are about an action, enabling a better media plan, enabling a better media buy. And it requires technology and data and the fusion of data for us to be able to do that. But that's a different type of business model, it's a different type of industry, it's a different type of approach than saying we want to understand people better. And again, it's not about one or the other. It's not we should do the left-hand side or we should do the right-hand side. For us as a business, we need to do both. It's not a choice that we have, or it's not a choice that we ought to have. And obviously big data, and you'll hear a ton of stuff about big data. The place where we saw it applied in perhaps the most interesting way over the last few years was in the Obama election campaign, and I'm very pleased to be able to work with Joel Bennington, who's now part of Kantar and is President Obama's pollster and does all of the polling work and the strategy work for the president. But if you talk to Joel, he'll talk to you about the Obama campaign being a perfect fusion of big data techniques to identify and target and traditional techniques, qualitative, ethnographic, survey, to really get to some of the why questions as to why people think the way they do and what can be made to change them. And obviously, big data can be applied in lots of different places. I mean, you'll hear from Rosie Hawkins this afternoon about how TNS is using it in brand tracking, and you'll hear some of it from Robert Wieland tomorrow at TNS. Whether it's in brand tracking or in customer satisfaction, lots of applications. And if you think about our media business and our consumer panel business, again, how do we combine panel approaches, which we've traditionally had to measure media, with big data approaches? So some of what clients need is exactly the same, but how we go about it and how we actually combine these things changing very rapidly. And then most importantly, I would say, on the talent side, and that's where, in a way, I feel the greatest urgency, and when I think about the next 5 years and the need to revolutionize our business, this is probably the area where I think it's the greatest task that we have. Because if we're honest with ourselves, the research industry is not the sexiest industry in the world. And no one goes to school thinking, what I really want to be is a researcher when I grow up. All of us have come into the industry in different ways, love it once we're in it, but it wasn't the ambition when we set out. And there's a lot of competition. There's a lot of competition from Google and from Facebook and from Twitter. There's a lot of competition from a whole bunch of places that are now kind of in our space. And we've got a big challenge because we need to nurture traditional research. It's really, really important that traditional research, statistical techniques, the quality of what we do from a research point of view is incredibly important. As we rush into new things, very important that we don't rush away from recognizing that and really nurturing the people who are great researchers. But at the same time, we need a whole load of other types of people within our business. We need data analysts. We need people from the digital world. We need people from the media world. We need people who aren't just in the business of collecting data, but know how to connect data. Now, the analogy that we use within Kantar is moving from people who are all farmers who are collecting data to people who are more like chefs who are connecting data. It might be their data or it might be someone else's data. So a real need to make our business and our industry a much more holistic business from the point of view of the talent within the business. And it's that broad and deep quality of talent that will make the biggest difference to us going forward. So I hope you've got a kind of sense of kind of how I think about things. I think we have a hugely exciting next few years ahead of us, but I also feel a real sense of urgency in terms of what we need to do differently. And if I have one piece of advice for people in our business, it's you need to separate out in your own daily lives the urgent from the important. Because all of us find it incredibly easy to deal with all of the stuff that comes up that's incredibly important. A client pitch, something's gone wrong, a piece of work that hasn't worked the way that it has to, someone's resigned. I mean, that whole lot of stuff happens the whole time. And you can go through an entire year and deal with all of those important things but never actually get on to the urgent things. And unless we find time to get on to the urgent things and find a way of making sure that we do change the talent pool, that we do address survey and big data, that we do change the culture within our companies, that we do help our clients have bigger impact within their organization. Unless we actually address all of those urgent things, those important things, we'll never get on to what we need to do. So I hope that gives you a sense of kind of how we're approaching things, and hope you have a lovely couple of days. And if we have time for questions, happy to take them, and if not, I'm here for the rest of the day.
Thanks, Eric. That was great. A few hands shot up there, so we'll go here first.
Thanks for your story. One question, because you talk about transformation and also a sense of urgency. What's the one thing to start with? Because you tell a lot. If there's one thing you should choose, what is then the thing that has the most urgency, actually?
That's a good question. I mean, I think a lot of it depends on, and I don't know kind of where you're working or your company. A lot of it will obviously depend on, you know, your own situation in terms of where you are in the market. But I would say the most important place to start is ask yourself the question, what's the thing that would have the greatest impact on your clients 3 years from now? So if you just give yourself a bit more of a medium-term horizon, and what would make the biggest difference in terms of the impact you could have on your clients? And start there and come backwards. Because I think you'd find yourself answering some of your issues in a slightly different way.
We have another question at the front.
Hi, Eric. Jonathan Deitch. I manage global sampling for a large French market research company that is probably equally complicated and difficult in terms of driving change. I'm sort of wondering how you look at the management perspective on this, because you've talked about culture, and when you think about sort of the large, complicated organizations, like certainly the one I work for, you know, there's a need to really sort of get through that management layer and put the pieces in place to drive change across multiple business units. I'm curious sort of how you're viewing this, how you're approaching it, and creating that culture change in sort of the senior or even middle management levels.
Everyone always envies what they don't have, don't they? So I envy startups, and I envy companies who are only based in one office. So when I go and spend time with Facebook in California, and most of the people are in that one office, I think it would be so easy to drive the culture because everyone's sitting in the same place. And startups look at us and think, oh God, you're so lucky because you've got scale and you're everywhere, and we don't have this issue of how we need to grow our business with global clients and all of those types of things. And obviously startups end up having some of the same issues that we have. And if you look at a Google or a Facebook or some of the startups in the room, as they grow, as they get more offices, as they get more layers, they end up having some of the same issues that bigger organizations and more matrixed organizations have. So some of the issues around culture change are to do with where people are and where they are physically, and being able to get people together. So I would say the biggest thing that we can do, and we're obviously structured in a way where we have individual brands within Kantar, and part of the reason for doing that is that we do have different specialisms that we want to nurture. And we think that from a culture point of view, as long as we can have something of a Kantar culture, it's really helpful to have individual companies within Kantar with somewhat of their own culture who own that and can drive that, because it makes it more manageable. It makes it easier to do. But I'd say the biggest thing to your question is alignment. I mean, if you can get all of the people within the business pointing in the same direction, feeling the same sense of urgency around the same things, having the same set of priorities, and then letting them figure out how that then manifests itself on their clients or in their countries, that makes a huge difference. And I've seen businesses within Kantar where you didn't have alignment, and the same business a couple of years later with that kind of level of alignment, and the level of energy and the ability to get stuff done is just huge.
Time for one last question.
Hey, Eric. You know, I think one of the things that's interesting and sort of fascinating about Kantar and your approach versus some of the larger research organizations like Ipsos or GfK is that there seems to be more of a focus on collaborating with other companies. The ComScore deal was just announced this last week. Obviously, you mentioned you have an investment in Zappy Store. Do you feel like that helps culturally a little bit to almost create that startup or more collaborative environment within Kantar versus being focused on acquisitions, which it seems like some of the other larger firms are more focused on acquisitions versus investments in collaboration?
I mean, we have done some acquisitions over time as well. But I think we start from a place which is, even though we're a big company, we've got 32,000 people around the world, but we can't do everything. There's too much stuff going on, and we can't do everything. And if we want to do the best job for our clients, we have to partner. We have to partner within Kantar. We have to partner with companies that may seem like competitors. There are projects that we do for Unilever where we're sitting in the same room with Nielsen people talking about what needs to be done. I much prefer doing a deal with ComScore or with Rentrack and working with someone to be able to achieve much bigger goals than not being the best in what we do and not being able to drive that ourselves. So if we can be the best in something, we should do it, we should scale it, but we have to be honest with ourselves and say there are lots of things where we don't have the skills and we're not the best. And if we want to do the best for our clients, we have to partner. Now that's hard for people. I mean, I don't want to say that that's an easy thing to do because everyone wants to be able to kind of control something, and that's a very natural human instinct. But as we kind of move from that, from the farmer to the chef needs to be able to use lots of ingredients to make the best meal. And so we are very focused on it. And I think the other thing that people get out of it is as people do collaborate with others, it actually helps them with their personal growth because they learn things that they would never have learned before. They learn different ways of doing things, which they wouldn't have learned before, and they just see things in a different way. So I think from a personal point of view, a client point of view, a business point of view, recognizing that partnering is a core skill that we need to have is incredibly important for the future.
Big thank you to Eric.
Thank you.